Welcome to Grounded with Jon Tester and Maritsa Giorgio. We have a lot of spicy headlines to get to today.
I used to joke that folks would come up to me at Trump rallies and ask for a selfie, and some would give me the middle finger, and I would say, just make sure you get the selfie first. Don't do the middle finger, then ask for the selfie. You got to make sure you do it the right way.
That's veteran political reporter Jim Acosta with just a taste of what's coming up in this episode. And we are so glad you're here with us as we live through this shared experience together and try to make sense out of some of the chaos. I'm Maritsa Giorgio, along with my co-host, former U.S. Senator Jon Tester of Montana.
And we'll be able to talk to Jim about some interesting things, including what's gone on as far as coverage of the president of the United States, and how it may not be like it used to be. In fact, it is not like it used to be. And we want to get his perspective as somebody who's really been in the room where it happens and what has changed there. But the truth is, there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and probably the most disturbing for me is kind of a continuation of what's transpired over the last 2-3 weeks, starting at the G7, where the Vice President of the United States got up and embraced dictatorships around the world and called our allies the problem. That's a problem for Jon Tester. I was raised in a time where Russia has been always has been our big threat. They're the ones that had why we have ICBMs in Montana, quite honestly. It's why John F. Kennedy reacted the way he did during the Cuban Missile Crisis, all because of Russia. And it has continued throughout my lifetime. And to see the Vice President and the President of the United States push away our allies and embrace dictatorships like Russia and China and North Korea and Iran, Russia and China more specifically, is very, very troubling to me. And we'll probably talk about some of that stuff today moving forward.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about with Jim Acosta. Before we get to that chat, though, we should rattle off some headlines. Just a slow news weekend again. The biggest headline, of course, I'm sure you've heard about it if you're following the news at all, what went down in the Oval Office on Friday between President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
From the very beginning of the war,
you're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
So that's a fraction of a shouting match that lasted several minutes. I want to get initial thoughts with you, Senator. What went through your mind when you saw that? And really, as we move this forward, what comes next? We have the Kremlin saying that U.S. foreign policy now aligns with Russia, and so many European nations saying they really don't see us as an ally anymore.
Well, I think all you have to do is look at that exchange. What I would say is that exchange should have, tough conversations need to happen. There's no doubt about it, but that exchange should have never happened on national TV. It should have never happened in a way where it appeared that there was a tag team on Zelenskyy. Look, I've been in the chamber when Zelenskyy has addressed Congress. He got standing ovations multiple times. Why? Because he was fighting a war against our biggest adversary in Russia, and doing a pretty damn good job of it, an amazingly good job of it. And then to bring him in the Oval Office and to have questions asked like, how come you're not wearing a tie? Or questions asked like, geez, how come you haven't said thank you? When I've heard him personally say thank you many, 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 many times over, more than I've got fingers, a lot more. And the bottom line is, plus the ambassadors do the same thing when they come in and talk to you. The first thing they say is how much they appreciate the United States. I don't know what he was referring to. Maybe it wasn't a personal thank you to J.D. Vance or to President Trump. But the bottom line is Ukraine has been very, very thankful. They've told us many times in meetings that without the United States and NATO's support, this war would have been over a long, long time ago, which is what Trump reiterated the other day. But keep this in mind. What Ukraine has been trying to do is fight for freedom, fight for liberty, fight for the things that this country was established for. And for us, the United States of America, for President Trump and Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio to turn our back on them is just not consistent with what this country's been for the last 249 years.
One of the moments that really stood out to me was when JD Vance said he'd never been to Ukraine, but accused Zelenskyy of taking visitors on a propaganda tour. Now, a lot of your former colleagues from both sides of the aisle went to Ukraine. Did you ever get the impression that they thought they were on a propaganda tour?
Look, 2 weeks ago, we heard from Jean Shaheen. 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, on this very show, she talked about what she saw. Um, it, that isn't a propaganda tour. That's reality. These folks in Ukraine have been through hell. Why? Because Russia invaded them, an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine because they thought they could get away with it. And it's just totally ridiculous. These people who say, well, it was invaded because they were talking about getting into NATO and all that garbage. What the? I mean, really? That's what causes one country to invade another is just talk? Nothing had happened. Are they going to invade Finland too because Finland has requested to be in NATO? I mean, this is insane talk. And the bottom line is that there's no propaganda going on in Ukraine right now. These guys are fighting for their lives, literally. They're fighting for their cities. They're fighting for their communities. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting for liberty. Not to bring it up again, but it's a fact. Ukraine wants to be like us. They don't want to be like Russia. And I don't want to be like Russia either. So when our leaders embrace Putin or Xi Jinping, it's more than just a little bit disturbing to me. And so, yeah, it's just crazy. And we heard it from Jean Shaheen's lips 10 days ago when she was on this very show, talked about what she saw in Ukraine. That isn't a propaganda tour. That's real life and what's going on over there.
The Wall Street Journal's opinion page declared Russian President Vladimir Putin the winner of the Oval Office showdown. Since that happened, of course, we saw European leaders rally around Zelenskyy. They held emergency talks in London over the weekend. And in the US, we've seen a lot of condemnation from Trump critics over that exchange, placing blame on the president and the vice president. We also saw many GOP lawmakers praising Trump online and on the Sunday shows. House Speaker Mike Johnson said it was absurd for the media or opposition to say that Trump is on Putin's side. And he said it's understood that Putin provoked the war. But that goes against exactly what Trump said just in the week before. He called Zelenskyy the aggressor. Now, a lot of GOP lawmakers noticeably staying very quiet on this, not speaking out, with the exception of Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who said she's sick to her stomach as, quote, the administration appears to be walking away from her allies and embracing Putin, a threat to democracy and U.S. values around the world.
Yeah, so what I would say in regards to the Wall Street Journal's opinion page is I think there were two people who were winners in that exchange. Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, and Xi Jinping, the head of China. The truth of the matter is he is empowering both those countries, and both those countries do not like freedom. They don't like privacy. They don't like the things that the West has had now for 250 years. And I would also say that if you look at that exchange on TV, if you think about what was brought forward and how it was done, if you think about President Trump calling Vladimir Zelenskyy a dictator, if you think about in the previous administration him the president calling up Putin and congratulating on an election when those elections are absolutely unequivocally rigged, it just makes you wonder what's going on from a factual basis in the administration's head. I'll go back to the beginning. Russia put the troops on the border. They came across the border, unprovoked war. Zelenskyy was elected president of a democracy, and now we're in a situation where the United States is embracing Russia. Russia is pushing this out all over the country, all over the world. Our allies don't think they're there they don't think we're there to help support them. it's bad. And as Lindsey Graham said 2 weeks ago, I don't know what he would say today, but as he said 2 weeks ago at a forum, in this world, it's a dangerous world, and it's good to have friends. It seems as though we're pushing all our friends away, whether it's actions in the Oval Office or actions through tariffs. And I'm not talking about China here. I'm talking about Canada, Mexico, and part of Europe so far. I just don't think it bodes well for making America great again, quite honestly. In fact, it looks to me like we're weakening our stance in the world greatly, and that is not good for us, and it's not good for democracy, and it's certainly not good for freedom.
We want to welcome into the fold longtime political journalist Jim Acosta and host of the Jim Acosta Show on Substack, where he's had a lot to say about all of these happenings. Thanks for joining us on Grounded, Jim.
Good to see both of you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on board. What we've seen happen with the press with this administration has been at least none like I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, the press is always, for me as an elected public service, is somebody that you prepare for, but you respect them, and you don't expect to be interviewed by people who have the same perspective as you do. You expect them to ask tough questions, and I've seen that. I've seen some of that go away. Look, I'm gonna start out. You and Maritsa are in this business. I'm just a lowly ex-senator. But the truth is that. So tell me how the White House pool of reporters works. How is it supposed to work? How does the president get to choose who it does ask the questions during these, or who's in the room where it happens, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's a great question, Senator, and it's really great to be with you. The way it's supposed to work is the news organizations select who's going to be in the pool. The White House Correspondents Association, which is an organization that represents news organizations like the big name companies that you've heard about, all the networks, New York Times, Washington Post, Associated Press, Reuters. And every day, the WHCA and those news organizations agree upon what's called a pool. And it's essentially a group of reporters, because you can't have all, 100 to 200 different journalists going into the Oval Office every day. So for practicality purposes, you get about 6 or 7 different guys and ladies from different news outlets, and they go into the Oval Office. They go on Air Force One. So that way you have a group of people in the press accompanying the president in a variety of public settings. They're not with him at all times, obviously. And basically the way it's been for decades, I was at the White House for almost 8 years, is that the WHCA and the news organizations decide who's in the pool every day, and they deal with that. And, they may have some conversations with the White House press office about logistics. Okay, you're going to go in at this time, you're going to be in for these many minutes, and so on. But what Trump has been trying to do lately is a big departure from that. First of all, they have barred the Associated Press, which is one of the most important news institutions in the country, from going into the Oval Office, from going on Air Force One. And just recently, within the last week or so, they've announced that they're going to decide who is going to be in the White House press pool. And that has meant barring folks at the AP, barring folks at Reuters, but allowing people from conservative media outlets, essentially, mouthpieces of the current administration. And you could tell, Senator and Maritsa, how that could just be a slippery slope. That's the problem here.
So why is AP? Why is that a big deal that AP is not in there? Why is that maybe more significant than any other news agency?
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. One is the reason why they were kicked out of the press pool. That reason is because, and folks may have seen this in the news, Trump recently decided just out of nowhere that he was going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. The Associated Press said, well, it's been called the Gulf of Mexico for many, many years, a couple of centuries now, something like that. We're going to keep doing that from an editorial standpoint. The Trump White House got furious and said, okay, well, we're kicking you out of the White House press pool. And the reason why that's so important is, and I know this from many years working in local news, Maritsa knows this as well, the AP is an organization that news outlets like the networks, even Fox, rely upon for information. The AP is in all 50 states. They're in about 100 different countries. About a couple of billion people look at their content every day. So when you kick the AP out of the White House Oval Office, kick them out of Air Force One, they don't have the same access to the president that some of the other very important news organizations have. And of course, the AP, as we all know, has sued to get that access back. And it's going to be a wait for them. They're going to have to wait until this gets in front of a judge to a point where the judge can adjudicate this. A similar thing happened to me, Senator, if you might remember, Maritza, back in 2018. They took away my press pass because they didn't like some of the questions that I was asking Donald Trump. We went to a federal judge to get it back. We got it back. And it was a Trump appointed federal judge who gave it back to us. So he's been playing these games for some time with the press. What he's trying to do is strong arm the media into doing the news the way he wants. And you just can't let that happen. That's not the way we do it in America.
Yeah, Jim. I mean, I remember that moment very well in 2018, and it actually turned into a whole big thing. A lot of people
Yeah.
really targeted you for a long time after that. I still see people targeting you. I saw the clip from Fox News hosts targeting your plant in your
Yeah.
office on your Substack, which tells you something. But I want to talk a little bit. I want to put a pin in this because I do want to come back to the encounter on Friday and that heated exchange in the Oval Office. But let's talk for a second. Let's stay on the press pool. A Russian state media reporter from TASS made it into the room Friday. Not the
Yeah.
AP, not Reuters, both wire services like you were just talking about. Now, the White House said that journalist was not authorized to be in the press pool. To pass the smell test for you, because I've reported there a handful of times. You were there every day. It's not what I would call loose security.
Yeah. No. I don't know what the Russian word for baloney is, but that would be the word I would use right now. I mean, come on, guys, give me a break. You're going to let somebody from TASS, the Russian state news media outlet, and you're not going to let the Associated Press and Reuters in there? Come on, give me a break. And this highlights a very big problem. You can't have a bunch of sycophantic propaganda folks around the president of the United States and expect those people to ask hard questions. Look what happened the other day. They let somebody in there who I works for some right-wing news outlet who was asking Zelenskyy why you didn't wear a suit, or does he own a suit? And it's like, are you kidding me? Elon Musk is in there wearing a t-shirt and jeans and a dark MAGA hat. I mean, it's just sort of selective outrage. And it's pretty obvious. And so, part of this is, guys, and Senator, you know this, Donald Trump has very thin skin. He does not like hard questions. And when you challenge him, they take it as sort of challenging the king. Like, how dare you? How dare you ask a hard question of King Donald? And that's just not, again, I'd like to put it this way. It's just not how we do it in this country. And it's very contrary to the American way of life. Can you imagine if in Montana, the governor said, well, we're just going to have these friendly outlets come in when I do this news conference, or the mayor of Billings say, well, you know what? I don't like the story that the newspaper did last week, so they're kicked out. Again, this would just be such a slippery slope if this becomes common practice around the country. And frankly, it's the way the Russians do it. It's the way they do it in places like Hungary and Venezuela, and where my dad is from in Cuba. We don't want that kind of a situation in this country. It just doesn't work.
We've talked about checks and balances on this quite a bit. And most of it has to do with the judicial versus the legislative versus the executive. But the other check and balance out there is the media. And that is their ability to ask questions and hold elected officials accountable to get the answers to the questions. And if they don't get the answers, they can follow up and work even harder. And it makes it so obvious to the people out there that are watching the news that what was done either was or wasn't done for the reasons that elected officials do them. I mean, it is so critical for our democracy.
It really is. And I mean, look at what took place in the Oval Office Friday with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. I mean, there's some real important stuff happening right now in DC and over at the White House. And you have to have a free press pushing back and asking the hard questions. And one of the things that I found, Senator, over the years, and I'm sure you have too, Maritza, is, I think there's a public expectation for us to be tough. There's a public expectation for us to ask I want him to ask this question. I hope this reporter is smart enough to ask the question that I've got on my mind. And if we weren't doing that, we wouldn't be in business. It's just, these folks, they talk about being in love with the free market and everything. Well, let the free market work. Let the toughest sons of guns go in there and do the best job that they possibly can, instead of a bunch of, the ringers from this outlet or that outlet.
Yeah, you want the journalists asking the questions that you're screaming at the TV with
Yeah,
people
exactly.
or something.
Right.
Let's talk about the Oval Office spectacle. I
Yeah.
mean, Jim, you've been in a lot of sprays like that. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, and I mean, I've seen Trump act in outrageous ways. There's no question about it. I know the senator has as well. And, I think it is very troubling what took place on Friday, because Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been an ally of the United States. They're on the front lines of democracy over there on Ukraine. If Ukraine falls, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to figure out what Vladimir Putin's going to do next. He's going to try to go after other countries in Eastern Europe. And if he goes after a NATO country because, well, we didn't put up much of a fight, NATO didn't put up much of a fight, what happens then? I mean, then we're on the precipice of what, World War III? I mean, I hate to speak in those terms, but we really could get that desperate that fast. And I just don't want to see something like that. And, you got to wonder what is going on with Donald Trump. I've been in the Oval Office with him. I've been with him out there on presidential foreign trips and so on. And he just seems to have this affection for Vladimir Putin, fascination with the dictators. It's just the darndest thing. I don't quite understand it. I've asked lots of people about it. And I do think it's something that should concern a lot of Americans. And, to send Zelenskyy off in that fashion, and then he goes to Europe over the weekend and meets with all of our allies without the United States there. I mean, my goodness, what a turn of events for this country and for the world. The U.S., and the senator knows this, the United States is sort of that indispensable nation. Without us, on the scene, taking on the leadership role, a lot of bad stuff can happen.
I watched after the Oval Office incident. Zelenskyy went on Brett Baer on Fox and did an interview. I don't know if either one of you have seen it or not, but it was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is Baer said, I mean, President Trump wants to be in the middle and negotiate this out. And Zelenskyy said, I want him to be on our side. I don't want him to be on Russia's side. And I thought,
Yeah.
that's pretty damn instructive, because it's true. I want him to be on the side of democracy. I don't want him to be on the side of a tyrant, on somebody we've never been able to trust my entire lifetime. Before you got on, I told Maritsa, I said, my whole life, I mean, from remembering of the Cuban Missile Crisis on, Russia has been
Yeah.
the reason we have ICBMs in Montana. It's the reason we've had the military we've had. And I think if you take their side as the leader of the free world, it cheapens democracy around the world and makes these guys just all the more autocratic. And I just don't
Yeah.
think it's good for the world. But I'd like to hear your comment about Zelenskyy and how
Yeah.
he acted, and whether it was. I didn't see it as a slap in the face of the president. I saw a guy that was incredibly frustrated, who had been at war for 3 years, who was trying to figure out how they could get out of this war and still have a country left with freedom and dignity, not only this year, but 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Senator. I mean, I was really impressed with the way he stayed cool under fire there. And, even after some pretty outrageous remarks from Vice President J.D. Vance, your former colleague, I mean, for J.D. Vance to go in there and say, why haven't you thanked us before? Give me a break. I mean, that's right out of, crazy conservative right wing talking points, that he's never said thank you before. It's been documented dozens of times that he has said thank you. And so, part of my observation of all this is that what Trump and JD Vance were saying by and large throughout that whole exchange was, sort of ripped from the talking points of Fox News and other conservative outlets when they like to beat up on Ukraine. And to me, Zelenskyy, I think, handled himself very well. Now, I mean, where he goes from here, that's a difficult proposition. I mean, it sounds like the French, the Brits, they're trying to put this deal back together. I was talking with Congressman Eugene Vindman the other day, and he was saying, a mineral development deal like the one they were talking about might actually help Ukraine in the long run. If it helps develop some of those natural resources, maybe that's not such a bad thing. But at the end of the day, he's doing business with Donald Trump. And as you and I, as we've all, witnessed over the last, 20 or 30 years, people go into business with Donald Trump don't always end up on the better end of that deal. They usually end up on the short end of the stick. So, but I mean, and it kind of opens up a different point, and that is the U.S. and Senator, I think you might agree with this too. Since when is the U.S. in the business of taking advantage of vulnerable nations like this? And that to me is it's like it's beating up on the little guy, fighting for his survival. That just doesn't feel like the American way to me. It just rubs me the wrong way. I think it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
I think too, when we talk about this and just the polarization that we're seeing as a result of it, media literacy comes to mind and
Yeah.
understanding not only what's happening now, but also history. And I want to ask you about this because, first of all, there's personal history with these two. The 2019 phone call between Trump and Zelenskyy that
Yep.
actually prompted the first Trump impeachment, which you covered, Jim, of course.
Yeah.
And then, second of all, we have something called the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. Ukraine actually gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for
Right.
promises of security from the UK, the US, and Russia. We are not seeing those two things really being broadly mentioned in press coverage that I've seen anyway. Why? Why isn't this part of this broader understanding that the press is putting out to people to basically educate them?
Gosh, that's a really good point, Maritza. It's because we need more people like you in this business. That's what it is. And I do think folks may not be well versed on all of those different things, and it's important for you to point those out. But I get the sense from the reaction that I picked up on over the weekend from talking to folks, and maybe you did too, is there was sort of like a gut sense of all of this that what took place was just wrong. It just felt wrong on multiple levels. Like the one, for example, we were just talking about earlier about, the United States of America taking advantage of a vulnerable nation, shaking down another country, you better sign on to this or you're not going to get any protection. Like, what is this? The Sopranos, it just doesn't feel right. But you're absolutely right. One of the big problems that we have in this country, and I've talked about this many times, is news literacy and the fact that people, and some of this is exacerbated by social media, a lot of people out there are sort of trapped in these information silos. And, folks who are just getting their news from Fox or conservative media outlets, they might be waking up and saying, "Oh gosh, why is the price of gas so high? Why didn't the grocery prices go down like the way Donald Trump said they would? My goodness, I don't remember during the campaign us talking about, slashing the federal government to the place where it is right now. Although I will say, Breeza, you and I both covered the fact that, Project 2025 was something that Democrats were warning people about during the campaign. And, a lot of the folks who were drafting Project 2025 came right out of that first Trump administration. And Donald Trump went out there and said, "Oh, no, 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 I have nothing to do with this." And we reported, we put it out there. So there was some effort at news literacy going on at that point. But I do think if folks are just getting the news from certain outlets or outlets that agree with their point of view, they may wake up one day and say, "Holy Toledo, I didn't think that Donald Trump was just going to kick Zelenskyy out. I kind of like that guy." Or, the prices aren't coming down the way he said they would, and so on. So we got to get to a place where everybody is getting their information from either trusted news outlets or from independent journalists like ourselves who are committed to doing it the right way. And I may be a tad more outspoken now on my Substack show than I once was, but I think the times kind of call for it a little bit. I used to have a senior producer a long time ago when I worked for CBS News with Dan Rather, and he said, Jim, you got to grab people by the shirt collar with this stuff. You got to grab them by the shirt collar. And I'm kind of going back to that philosophy. Like, we got to sort of wake people up a little bit as to what's going on in this country. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to be concerned about that's happening right now.
I will tell you, Jim, that some of the things that Trump has put forward, like making government more efficient, for example, is things that I think most everybody would say that's a good idea. We ought to be looking for efficiency in everything. Unfortunately, as one person told me, he walks into every meeting with a meat axe and a hand grenade, and that's really not how you get things accomplished for the long haul. Might make you feel
Yeah.
good short term, but for the long haul, you've got to bring people in. You've got to talk to people. It's the way our government works. It makes it slower than people want, but the fact is, you get better decisions when you involve more people and you get different perspectives on how things are done. That way, when it comes to things like the National Nuclear Security Administration, and you fire everybody in it and go, "Oh shit, we fired everybody. They're responsible for
Yeah.
making sure nukes are safe," And so then you try to
Yeah.
hire back. Who wants to come back to a position like that? And if people would have been in the room that understood the facility, the bureaucracy, so to speak, the administration, whatever it is, they probably wouldn't have fired them to begin with.
Yeah. And Senator, I'm kind of curious because I know agriculture is a big part of what your state does as well. USAID, they distribute a lot of aid around the world, and they rely upon farmers to supply those goods and agricultural products and so on. And I mean, there are just so many different unforeseen consequences, unintended consequences, maybe intended consequences in a lot of cases, but hurting farmers, hurting people who protect our nuclear security. That doesn't sound like what folks voted for in the last election.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, if you
Yeah.
combine what's going on, like Head Start programs that are closing, we've got veterans programs that are being diminished. Some buildings aren't being finished. Some buildings aren't being staffed. In the vets area, community health centers that are reducing services. I mean, the list goes on and on. And the question is,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's what people thought when they voted. I mean, that's not cutting to the bone. Isn't how you make government more efficient. That's how you make it so it doesn't work very well.
I know you have to run. I want to sneak in one more quick question if I
Oh yeah,
can.
sure.
Because
You bet.
the first time I met you was in Missoula, Montana at a Trump rally. I
Oh
saw
yeah. Yeah.
people literally come up to you and threaten your life, said they were going to kill you. You've been in the crosshairs a long time. We've seen this ramping up of attacks on journalists, real people like you and me. So, can you just talk kind of personally about what it's like to be on the receiving end and also just more broadly what it does to our access to information in general?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking that. I mean, I will say one of the reasons why I went to the Trump rallies and I continue to do it, even with all that stuff going on, is, I grew up with a single mom. My dad worked in grocery stores for 40 years. I mean, that's the America that I come from. And when I go to a Trump rally, I see folks who remind me of my parents, remind me of their friends. And so I know that sometimes they can say a lot of stuff and maybe not mean it, or maybe they do mean it to some extent, and that's okay. But I am not a believer in uh, siloing ourselves to the point where we're not talking to one another. And Maritza, maybe it happened at that rally, maybe it didn't, but it happened at a lot of other rallies where folks would come up, give me the middle finger and that sort of thing. And then I'd go down and talk to them and I'd ask, well, what's going on in your life? Why are you so angry? What's happening here? And they would pour out their heart about, whatever stuff that they're going through. And at the end of the conversation, they say, well, maybe you're not so bad after all. I thought, I thought I didn't like you very much, but gosh darn it, you make it sort of hard for me to hate you. And that's the America that I believe in. And, I used to joke that folks would come up to me at Trump rallies and ask for a selfie, and some would give me the middle finger. And I would say, just make sure you get the selfie first. Don't do the middle finger, then ask for the selfie. You got to make sure you do it the right way. And that tends to, if you can slip a joke in there or something like that, you can disarm people a little bit. And I just try to remind people all the time, we're all on the same team. We're Americans. And I do think eventually this fever is going to break. People are hooked on hatred in this country. And I do think I'm an optimist. I'm a foolish optimist. I do think eventually that is going to run its course. And we're going to get back to being the country that the senator and I were talking about. I mean, I grew up with Rocky IV and what was it, Rocky III or Rocky IV with the Russian guy. I mean, or Red Dawn. I grew up with the Russians being the bad guys. All of a sudden we're, you just got to talk to folks in those kinds of terms. And maybe the Democrats, and I'm not speaking about the senator here because he's always been good at this, but maybe the Democrats kind of got a little rusty in that regard. got off their game a little bit. But I think the sooner they get back to just trying to talk to folks, just hear them out, I think the sooner they'll kind of turn things around. And that goes for the press too. We cannot act like, oh, all we care about is how the Wi-Fi is working on the Acela going from DC to New York. Like, you got to go out there and talk to people, man. And they want us to listen.
100%.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you come back to Montana. We promise we won't give you the finger.
I would. Yeah, just you're number one. That finger's okay, but
Yeah, I actually can't, Jim, so it's okay.
I like that. Hang loose, though. That's good.
Right, exactly. I go over big in Hawaii, but
that's it. Exactly.
Yeah, you come back and we'll introduce you to a good ski hill if you haven't already had that experience in Montana.
Would love that. I'll take you up on that. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim Acosta, host of the Jim Acosta Show on Substack. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, see you later, guys. Appreciate it.
It's so important, I think, for people to understand what goes on in the room where it happens, both from you, Senator, and from people like Jim Acosta, who spent many, many years in the White House covering, the first Trump administration in particular, but just to see and hear what it's actually like, because people don't always understand how the sausage is made.
Yeah, that's a fact. I've never been at a presidential press conference the way Jim Acosta has, and I, as a senator, you usually get harassed and harangued on your way to the floor by different people who are coming up to you and asking you tough questions. And by the way, that's their job. And the senator or the House member can choose to answer those questions, or they may not. But the truth is the press is there to ask questions about actions that are happening, to make sure that they're holding folks accountable who serve in public office. But I thought it was really important. The description he gave of AP News is really important, because, quite frankly, I don't know that a lot of people, particularly in rural areas like I live, understands the role of AP News. If AP is not in the room, our local TV stations, radio stations probably don't get that information, so they can't report on it. So we don't really know what's going on. And that's why it's important that AP and Reuters and the bigger name folks have an opportunity to go in there and cover those news conferences, and be able to ask questions that are applicable to our opinions. And I think it's really important. So to push those people out does not help.
Yeah.
Does not help us, the people of the United States, to understand what's going on in the country. It's dangerous.
And like we said, AP and Reuters, they're a wire service that news organizations subscribe to. And I've been in a few of those press sprays or press conferences at the White House. It is so competitive. People literally bring step ladders and they tear themselves up. And I remember my very first one, I stood underneath a step ladder because it was the only place for me to go. But to have somebody in that room with literally mentions of World War III ask Volodymyr Zelenskyy why he's not wearing a suit, when every reporter who has covered the White House and covered this war knows exactly why he's not wearing a suit, because he said it time and time again. It's interesting to me that that's the question you pick out of all the questions you could ask. You probably get one, and that's the question that they chose.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows a lack of professionalism and a lack of knowledge and a lack of doing your homework as a reporter. Look, the good reporters do their homework. And whenever I prepared for a press conference that I did as United States Senator, you'd go in and you'd go through questions that they might ask. And then I'd ask questions that I thought they might ask. And you'd try to go through it. And I can guarantee you, every one of those press conferences, I was asked a question that I didn't know was coming. And I had to justify my position that I was taking on whatever that was, whether it was on agriculture policy or transportation policy or foreign policy or whatever it might be. And that's important, because if you can't answer the damn question, then you probably are doing something that's inappropriate and not for the best interest of the country.
Okay, let's we got into our conversation with Jim Acosta early, which is good because it was a very thoughtful discussion, I thought. But let's skim over just a few of the other major headlines that happened in the last few days that really should be getting a lot more attention, but because we are just being inundated, you might have missed these. Elon Musk sending posts on X saying it's time for the US to leave NATO and the United Nations. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the Pentagon to stop cyber operations against Russia. The State Department cut off support for restoring the Ukraine energy grid. CNN reports now that foreign adversaries like Russia and China are ramping up recruitment efforts of our federal employees in national security who were recently fired by the Doge cuts. 5 former defense secretaries wrote a letter urging Congress to step in after the shakeups at the top of the military. The Trump administration slashed hundreds of jobs at the National Weather Service and NOAA. That's prompting warnings from meteorologists all over the country. And Elon Musk called Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time on the Joe Rogan podcast.
So I'll go over them one at a time. The fact that we've got Elon Musk, who is from South Africa, saying it's time for the United States of America to leave NATO and the United Nations does not make us stronger. It makes us weaker. Isolation makes us weaker. I don't know what the agenda that's going on in his head is, but he's there for government efficiency. I read an article last week. He got $38 billion last year in grant money. You want to make government efficient? Take that $38 billion check, because he's got it, write it back to the Treasury so we can reduce the debt. That'd be the right thing to do before you start firing people in willy-nilly ways like he has been doing. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ordered the Pentagon to stop those cyber operations against Russia. I guarantee you Russia is not stopping their cyber operations against us. What does that do? That makes us weaker. And for the Secretary of Defense to work to make us weaker and to make Russia stronger goes contrary to everything that I've known about this country and how it should operate.
Let me ask you about that one specifically, because, the whole goal here is to help us all better understand this. And my best friend asked me this morning, she said, what is a rational reason to do that? Why would they do that? Do you have any rational reason to do that, Senator?
It's only if you trust Russia and don't think Russia's still going to do bad things. And if they're not a threat anymore, then why waste your money, doing cyber operations? And like I said, I guarantee you Russia is going to continue their cyber operations on us. And Russia is still a huge threat. Make no mistake about it. And it's been talked about, well documented. The Ukraine thing, which is a half a world away, you might not think is important, but it's important. It's important to the world order. It's important to what happens after Ukraine. It's important what happens in Israel and Taiwan. It's important. It's important in the Pacific Rim, and like I've said many times, China is Putin and Xi Jinping are the big winners here, and China wants to replace us militarily and economically. I don't see how this is slowing them down one little bit on that, and so that's
recruiting our federal employees who just lost their jobs in national security.
It's interesting because the internet does a lot of that. They actually recruit elected members of Congress to try to get information from our government and give it to theirs, not knowing, by the way, they do it very, very well. So you may not even be knowing what you're doing when you're doing it, but you're playing right in the hands of our enemies. And so for them to go after people who have been laid off, disgruntled folks have been treated unfairly, folks that may have an axe to grind here, makes perfect sense from their perspective. Doesn't make good sense from ours.
Okay. I want to ask you before we go about your hat.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I didn't know you were going to be wearing red today, or I'd have worn my blue center. Here, just a second.
Okay, let's get it. I would say this is kind of more of a bright color, but it's showing red.
That's more. I got to get this picture really good. These hats are too new.
So you have those colors of hats that say U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and I don't have a white one. Doggone it. I mean, we missed out on that one because I know they're out there, but I did not get one. I got a red one and a blue one, so it's all good. But so why I'm wearing this hat It's time. You know, I'm going to tell you, I was told the story this last week. It was pretty interesting. When Robert C. Byrd was within the United States Senate and there was a Republican senator, or a Republican president, he was incredibly liberal. When there was a Democratic president, he was incredibly conservative. Why? Because as the United States Senator, he didn't trust the executive branch. He was there to hold them accountable. I wear this hat to let the senators know it's your job to hold the executive accountable. It's three co-equal branches. Can't be sitting on your hands. I know for a fact there's a lot of folks that I've visited with them on both sides of the aisle, Republican friends of mine that are not happy with the way things are going. You got to stand up. You got to stand up. It's what the forefathers had in mind. And if you don't, then it puts our government at risk. It really does. So that's why I'm wearing the U.S. Senate hat today.
U.S. Senate hat. Okay, I had some viewer questions, but we have run long. So next week, I am going to ask former U.S. Senator Jon Tester about people calling for him to run for president, for governor of Montana, and also for the president of my homeowners association. So we'll see what he says next week.
I don't think that would be legal, by the way, because I don't own a home in your homeowners association reach.
Okay, well, we'll ask about the president and the governor next time. Looking ahead, a lot happening this week. A nationwide day of protests scheduled on Tuesday, the same day as President Trump's address to Congress, which I'm sure will give us a lot to talk about on the next episode. You can find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also shoot us an email at groundedpcast@gmail.com.
So before we go, I just got to say one thing on the president thing and the governor thing. If I did that, I'd miss out on all this fun I'm having with Maritsa. So, that's just a no. It's just a flat no.
Oh, yeah. You can't do a podcast if you're governor.
No, can't do it.
All right. Thanks so much to our guest, Jim Acosta, to our friends at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music, and to all of you, our listeners. We will chat again soon.
Tally-ho.